Hello, hello, and welcome back to the podcast, everybody. And a special welcome to anyone who's joining us live in the Ayurveda and Women's Health Sisterhood on Facebook. Today, we have a really interesting topic, and I can't wait to dive into this. And the beautiful Leeza Mah-zay is joining us, and she'll be speaking to us about traditional nutritional philosophies and ancestral eating. Lisa is a non-binary nutritionist, herbalist, food sovereignty activist, and parent. Lisa is passionate about ancestral foods, intuitive eating, cooking culturally appropriate foods, walking in the woods, and writing poetry. She speaks 6 languages and is inspired daily by her clients and students. She was born and raised in Italy, where she learned the time-honored traditions of cultivating wellness with folk herbalism, local seasonal food, and ancestral healing. So welcome to the podcast, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
You're so welcome. I always start my episodes with our rapid inspiration questions. So could you please inspire us with what your superpower is?
Absolutely. I feel like my superpower is holding up the mirror of truth. I do the work that I do for myself so that I can hold up that mirror and people can see what they need to see reflected about their own lives without judgment. And that feels like a blessing and a gift that I get to share.
Beautiful. And I think it is so important as anyone like a health practitioner or anyone in the health and wellness space to hold up that mirror of truth on themselves and their own healing so that they can go and help others and other people can see that within themselves as well. Because it's also inspiring and motivating when clients, students understand what you have also been through and what you the wisdom that you can share from your own experiences. Can you share with us your favorite quote or mantra?
Oh my gosh, so many. And one that really came to me when I first met my yoga teacher and started my yoga practice in 1997. And this is truly divine inspiration and stays with me today. It's heal yourself so you can heal the earth.
Beautiful. It always starts with us, right?
Yeah.
And
we are the earth.
Yeah, that's it. We are. We're all part of this beautiful divine creation. And who or what is inspiring you at the moment?
At the moment, I feel really inspired by various breathwork teachers that I've been studying with. I studied with originally somebody that I think is really well known, a Dutch teacher named Wim Hof, and have been studying with a herbalist and breathwork teacher named Jennifer Patterson. And we just had a breathwork session where we explored change. And it felt really powerful to reflect on the fact that change is the only true constant and to let that move through during the breathwork session.
Absolutely. And we had our first Ayurveda Alchemist call for 2023 not long ago, which is my program that certifies you to become an Ayurveda holistic health coach. And we spoke on this topic in that very first call about how change is the only constant, because we can get so caught up on all of these or stressed and anxious about things not going our way or things changing. And it's the only constant is that it is going to change, and to be aware of that and to be accepting of that and how much that can actually empower you. So I totally resonate with what you just shared then. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So to get us started, could you please share with us your story of how you got started as a board certified nutritionist?
Yes, well, it really began as a child, and I was raised very much in a traditional family and a family that did a lot of wildcrafting, herbal medicine making, and growing food, preserving food. And that, seemed normal to me. It was, and it's still very much the way my family lives in Italy. When we came to the States, I was really shocked. I remember going into the grocery store with my parents and saying, where's the food? Everything was, packaged and wrapped. And even in the produce section, it was like, yeah, everything had its little styrofoam tray and plastic wrap. It was very confusing to me. And I was walking around, and of course, people were driving everywhere, not walking. And I was looking around and saying, well, where are people's gardens? Where's the food that's growing, right? And so I suddenly realized that folks had lost touch with their true sources of nourishment and where food was actually coming from. And from that moment, I just kind of naturally started, as I made friends, inviting them over, cooking for them. And my dad and I were digging up the backyard and planting garlic. And I feel like my journey really began because of emigrating to a different country and realizing, I had the privilege of growing up in an intact food culture. And then truly my journey began because I contracted intestinal parasites. I lived in Bali for many years after college and continued exposing myself to parasites, right? My gut microbiome is not a Balinese gut microbiome. And my parasites became quite chronic. I became quite ill. I was running a fair trade textile import business that I had to sell. And I, after taking many, many antibiotics that basically cleared house in my gut for the parasites to flourish, and I felt, worse and worse, I had a moment where there was an epiphany, and I said, I remember I grew up in a way that restores health, restores balance. And I started eating those foods. I started preparing sauerkraut, started making my own sourdough starter again, and just started incorporating these whole ancestral foods into my eating, started bringing herbs back in. And that was really the beginning of my healing journey that then led me to be in service to the plants and the foods that healed me.
Beautiful. And I love both of those places. Italy and Bali are like two of my favorite places to visit. I obviously haven't been able to get to Italy as much as I'd like to, being on the other side of the world, but I go to Bali a lot and I absolutely love both of them. And I think when me and my husband were last in Italy, I felt so healthy. I think all of the millions of stairs that we had to walk up, we were in like Positano and all those places, but we absolutely loved it. Like, the food, it was so wholesome and fresh and beautiful. And yes, everyone is walking around, and lucky for us, we actually really love walking and exercising. But yeah, the stairs were next level.
Yes.
All of the stairs. It was crazy, but it's
yes.
So good. And so when you speak of traditional nutritional philosophies and ancestral eating, what do you mean by this? Just for our listeners, can you break that down a little bit?
Absolutely. I think what I have come to in my nutrition practice is that, yes, we can embrace traditions that are unbroken, time-honored, like Ayurveda, like Chinese medicine, like the way of eating that comes from the Mediterranean, as tools for healing, as tools for treating conditions therapeutically, for restoring balance. And ultimately, we all have a healing tradition in our lineage, in our ancestry. And I think so important to get to know what that is. And it's no mistake that these traditions like Ayurveda, like Chinese medicine, have become so important in other parts of the world, right? There are these complex, intricate, and beautiful systems of healing. And part of what I want to remind people of is that we all have that beauty and that intricacy in our heritage. And I really encourage people to kind of trace that back, because our ideal way of eating ultimately is pre-programmed into our DNA. The foods that our body thrives on come from and have been handed down to us from our ancestors. So I think that's a great sort of starting point when thinking about, what do I want to be eating? What's ideal for me?
Absolutely. And I think we have made nutrition so complicated, a lot more complicated than it needs to be. If you just think about the basic roots of how we are supposed to eat and how we grew up to eat. So I think it is, something that is becoming more, people are becoming more aware of that instead of following all of the fad diets that are trendy and on point and, you know, in the latest magazines. People are becoming more aware that they are not sustainable and they are not the way of life. But there's still so much more education and awareness that can be, introduced to people still. And I know that you blend your knowledge of general nutrition that you learned through your nutrition course with Ayurveda, TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, and intuitive eating to help your clients. So each of these systems, they have a slight difference with, I mean, the root of it all is the same, but like you said, there's some complexities and intricacies of these traditional eating methods. So how do you integrate them all for better health for your clients?
Absolutely. I love that question. And it truly is a mosaic that is personalized, right? So it's a little bit different for everybody. And I find that some of the elegant metaphors of Ayurveda are more kind of appropriate or relatable to certain folks. And especially, you know, somebody who maybe already has a yoga background or an interest, right? There is that relationship. And then for somebody who's interested in understanding, you know, how all of the organ systems kind of interact and relate to, you know, cause an imbalance, right? Like in Chinese medicine, we talk about how liver is chronically imbalanced in modern culture because we're pushing. And for people who are sort of more interested in thinking about organ systems in that way and how one organ like the liver might be a parent to another organ like the kidneys, I think Chinese medicine can be kind of a more of a relatable system to that sort of person. And in terms of intuitive eating, right, it's about taking those philosophies, those metaphors, those ways of seeing how we're in connection with the earth, and allowing those pieces of wisdom to help settle our nervous system, because I think that's ultimately the root of intuitive eating is when my nervous system is settled, when I'm present with what's happening, I can listen and I can hear my body's requests and understand them, interpret them, and meet them.
Absolutely. And just taking that a little bit back a little bit further, from an Ayurvedic standpoint, is when we are in more of a balanced state, we can listen to that intuitive way of eating and what the body needs to balance its, we say, doshas. But somebody who is really out of balance, their mental clarity, their connection to what they crave and what they need can sometimes be misbalanced as well. So that type of eating pattern and eating behavior isn't always serving them. It's like when you're in a healthy, balanced state, you want more of that goodness. But when you're not, you often crave the things that aren't great for you. Generally, when you're in more of a tamasic state, so you're having the tamasic energy of dullness, of lethargy, of even some depressive moods, or you're just not feeling your higher self, it's not often that those type of people say, I'm going to make a really beautiful light dish of cooked vegetables. They often go for like those foods that sort of feed that mood even more, like the heavy, depressive sort of sticky food. So I guess in regards to that, how do you help people discern whether they are craving the right types of food for them or not in that moment?
I love that question, right? And thinking about the Ayurvedic framing, we are trying to lean into that sattvic, all right, sort of balanced space. And I try to kind of talk about the difference between instructive cravings, like, ooh, I woke up craving cinnamon. What's that about, right? Let's read about cinnamon. Oh, it's balancing my blood glucose. It's giving me natural sweetness. Okay, maybe I ate a big piece of chocolate cake last night before bed. Interesting, the cinnamon is trying to come in and help me to bring that balance into my day the next day. That's sort of an example of an instructive craving, right? And a destructive craving, again, thinking about Ayurveda and kind of that notion of like feeds like, it's like, oh, I had that big piece of chocolate cake last night. I wake up craving the chocolate cake again. And that's sort of more of a destructive craving. And we don't want to be building on the foods that aren't so helpful, right? So ultimately, on a physiological level, it's about shifting our gut bacteria, because the gut bacteria are directly triggering the cravings. And the gut bacteria that love chocolate cake are speaking to the brain and saying, I'm hungry, give me more chocolate cake. And the beauty is we can transform that gut bacteria in a very short period of time. But it takes understanding that that craving is a destructive craving, because it's feeding, again, more of that rajasic kind of foggy, confused state. And ultimately, I think getting to the instructive cravings is actually not so much about the food itself. It's more about me wanting to find harmony with my body, peace with my body, harmony with my environment, right? And once I kind of make that decision and lean into that, then I can choose the foods that I know are helpful, you know, and with my clients, we kind of talk about what they think might be most helpful. And yeah, it might not feel intuitive for 5 days, for a week, but then that gut bacteria shifts over, the intuition kind of starts to kick in, and the instructive cravings of like, let's cook that bowl of veggies really starts to kind of take over, which is a beautiful transformation to witness.
Absolutely. I love the definition of the instructive cravings and the destructive cravings, because it's so true. And your gut microbiome, it does dictate so much of your cravings. I think the other thing that can dictate a lot of your cravings, like we were speaking about, if you are in more of that tamasic state, the lower moods, the lower energy, you might crave that, you know, sugar, chocolate cake, whatever that might be, because it feeds those dopamine receptors. So people who are comfort eaters, it's because the food comforts them in a way that it feeds the dopamine receptors and it gives them that sort of short-term high. And so coming back to really understanding yourself and understanding your behaviors and understanding your patterns is really important. And as you mentioned, eating more in a sattvic way and just knowing what that is, because I think people, when they look at these traditional systems of eating, at first, they can feel complicated and overwhelming. And even with Ayurveda, I say just keep it so simple. Like we're aiming for more of a sattvic diet, which is whole foods, fresh foods where possible, that nourish our body, because each food and each like vegetable or fruit, all of the pigment on the skin, the pigment in the skin, being different colors, feeds different parts of our microbiome. And so we need that for diversity. And I think that when we can start to understand these things and understand what a sattvic diet is, we know when it's not. so we can bring ourselves back into balance with just really simple traditional rules, or not rules, but philosophies around eating. I would love to know what nourishment means to you.
Absolutely. I think it is so much for me about those ancestral foods that I spoke about, with which I was raised, and including those, and making sure there's always fermented food in my eating. And, a little bit goes a long way, right? And I find that eating seasonally feels so balancing and so harmonizing and so supportive of connecting with what's happening in the environment, what's happening in the world around me. I now live in a very cold place. Today we went skiing. We're surrounded by snow, right? And everything's very sort of quiet and peaceful at this time of year. And that speaks to a lot of soups, a lot of foods that are warm and cooked for a long time, a lot of root vegetables, a lot of broths, and always spices. I really feel like spices bring whole foods to life, and they truly have a high concentration of nutrients, and that gives them not only flavor, but a powerful capacity to heal. And so for me, nourishment really feels like not only sort of aligning with the season and what's happening, right? When it's, when the world around me is covered in blankets of snow, I'm not going to eat salad. I'm not going to eat raw food really at all, unless it's lacto fermented, right? Like sauerkraut. And I'm going to take the time to slow down and savor the food. And in the summertime, when it's warm out and, we're out playing in the fields and working in the gardens and swimming, we might have 5 smaller meals throughout the day that do include more raw foods, and are just kind of lighter because of the nature of the energy. It's just a little bit easier to digest those things, I think. And that seasonality and reflecting how we're changing in alignment with the earth's changes, that really feels like true nourishment to me. And then the component of, breathing, lighting a candle, speaking an intention feels really important as well.
Absolutely. And the reason that, fruits and vegetables grow at certain times of the year is because that's when they are fueled with the most nutrients they can absorb from the earth. And so they pass those nutrients onto us at certain periods throughout the year, meaning seasonal eating. And the other thing is that our bodies are so intelligent. They were designed to eat seasonally and actually have different enzymes to break down different seasonable foods. But in our modern way of eating, we just eat the same thing all year round. And like you discovered when you moved to the States, packaged foods and just random things that have nothing to do with seasonal eating or our circadian rhythm or anything like that. And we're wondering why we have so many gut issues, because our body's trying to break down these weird and wonderful things all year round and just diminishing our Agni, our digestive fire. So Agni is a Sanskrit term that we use in Ayurveda. I would love to know what you see as the biggest challenges with our modern diet and way of eating.
Absolutely. I think that there is so much choice, right? And I think that really ties into what you were saying about the health field and the nutrition field. There's an overwhelm of information. It's really too much. And yes, traditional philosophies are complex. And as you said, their base message is simple, whole foods as close to the earth as possible. And I think trying to simplify the kinds of choices that we make, and even just thinking about the thermal nature of food, right? Like my kids get mad at me that I don't let them eat bananas in the winter. I'm like, no, they're cooling. They're a tropical food to cool heat, and we do not need to cool heat or generate dampness in our systems in the wintertime. We just don't. And I think that that's so clarifying and so simplifying, even though the bananas are always on the shelf. It's like, no, it's winter. We're not eating the bananas, right? And to try to learn more about your ancestors. I mean, my ancestors probably never ate bananas, and that's okay too, right? So we make adaptations for our modern world, and to really think about, okay, this is sort of what my ancestors ate in a whole food space, and which ones of these are warming foods and which ones are cooling foods, right? And even sort of simplifying the world of food from that perspective. And yes, making sure that we get all of the phytonutrients, all of the plant nutrients, and all of the different colors, and knowing, we can get a lot of the same nutrients from a beet as we can from a grape, for example, right? And I would probably tend to eat more beets when it's cold and more grapes when it's warm.
Mm. And just circling back to the start, when I mentioned that people are becoming more aware that fad dieting isn't working and that it's not sustainable, it's really important to cultivate a healthy relationship with food for longevity and quality of life and the ways in which we consume our food. So what are some simple steps that we can take to improve our modern diet and relationship with food? I know that people listening are going to say it's all well and good to cook from scratch all 3 meals and make all of this beautiful food, but I'm so time poor. Like the minute I get up, I'm, rushing the kids to school, I'm going to work and then eating whatever, they can find at work. And it usually comes in the form of packaged food, and then rushing home, and then it's so late and we've got to whip up a dinner. I've got after school sports. Like, what do you say to the people that they do want to change their ways? They want to eat well because they know that there's no sustainable diet other than the lifestyle diet of just eating in a way that's really true to simplistic ancestral eating. What are some simple steps that you would give them?
Absolutely. I love this question. And I think it's all about having the tools and then having the kind of set up in terms of a weekly schedule, right? So making a meal plan, at least knowing these are the dinners I want to make this week, going food shopping and saying, this might sound like a massive amount of time, but on a day off, setting aside 4 hours and saying, I'm going to go buy, during the 4 hours, I'm going to make my meal plan for the week. I'm going to go buy the food. I'm going to bring it home. And I'm going to break it down in certain ways. Like if I have root vegetables, I'm going to chop them. If I have broccoli, I'll take off the stems. If I have kale, I'll get my kids to rip it off of the stems and put things in the refrigerator that way. And then cook, a pot of a grain and a pot of a legume, right? A bean or a lentil. To have those things available to mix and match with. And that allows for, some ease during the week of kind of putting things together in a way that feels wholesome and nourishing and different each evening. And also, hopefully, a little bit less stressful. And then the other thing I would say from the perspective of tools, if you like the idea of having a slow cooker or an instant pot, I highly, highly recommend those tools. It's a wonderful way to kind of prepare something in the morning and then get home in the evening and it's essentially ready to be eaten, right? And Ayurveda, Chinese medicine would say, go to bed earlier and get up earlier, right? This is a hard ask for a lot of people because often, and I feel the same way having young children, evening is really the only time I get to myself to do things that I want to do to nourish myself, to read, to write, to have a date, or, have time with friends, right? To introspect. And it can be beneficial to go to bed even half an hour earlier so that we can start our morning, even for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, taking a breath, making a cup of tea, looking out the window, and just setting the intention for the day. Because we do, in many ways, create our own stress, right? Some of what's happening in life is out of control. And especially with preparing food and having nourishing whole foods, it's easy to create stress around that piece when it's ultimately the piece that helps to reduce our stress. So even starting the day 10 or 15 minutes earlier with a breath and a cup of tea can help us feel like, okay, I have a plan. I know what I'm doing. It's going to be all right.
100%. And I love my slow cooker. I use that so often. I cook my kitchery in that, actually. And it is perfect to throw on at the start of the day, so that by the end of the day, when you are like tired and done with the day, your meal is already cooked. And just coming back, you mentioned, Ayurveda and TCM would say wake up earlier and go to bed earlier, which, yes, 100% agree with. But I also just wanted to use that as a way to bring in these beautiful traditional teachings, but how to apply it into our modern world. And I think that's really important. So for instance, I often will tell my clients to make a beautiful, nourishing dinner. And from an Ayurvedic perspective, dinner should be the smallest meal of the day, right? Especially before bed. But use the leftovers. If it's a nourishing meal, use the leftovers for your lunch the next day. So you're making extra. And I know from the traditional past, they say not to use leftovers, not to reheat, all of those philosophies, which, yes, are true, because from an Ayurvedic perspective, we look at prana in the food, and prana is that life force energy. So fresh cooked is always best. It's going to have more life force energy in it. But I would much rather someone take a nourishing meal they cooked the day before and eat that for their lunch than to go and have a sandwich from a deli that's probably been there for a few days anyway, or even if it is cooked fresh, like a, I don't know, sushi rolls that are, caked in weird oils and stuff like that. So I think we do need to be realistic with the world that we live in and how we can best apply these beautiful traditions into our modern world. And the other thing with, we speak about leftovers is that, yes, it can create more histamine in the foods the longer you leave them. So for some people, that's not a good thing, especially if there's an estrogen histamine intolerance going on. So I think food is such individualized medicine, and we really need to work with our clients to be able to integrate these principles as best we can in their lifestyle. The other thing I really feel is that if people, women in particular, because I work in women's health. So if they knew how crucial, how important nutrition is on our hormones, gut health, and mood, then we probably would create more time to dedicate to it, because it is such a preventative medicine as well as a curative medicine. And so you've already mentioned how important nutrition is for our gut health, but I would love to speak a little bit more on how nutrition supports our hormones, our gut health, and our moods from a holistic health point of view.
Absolutely. And I think, as you said, there's so much we can do preventatively and curatively, right? So if you're already experiencing some of these symptoms, not all is lost. The food will still bring things back into balance. And I've cured myself of autoimmune hypothyroidism, also known as Hashimoto's, which I developed after the birth of my first child. And prior to that, I had infertility which likely was due to subclinical hypothyroidism, right? My progesterone was very, very low. So once again, I turned to food, and one of the tremendous impacts was from doing seed cycling. So, during the first half of the cycle, focusing on flaxseed and pumpkin seed to help flush excess hormones and support the liver. And then second half of the cycle, focusing on sesame seeds and sunflower seeds. And that beautiful cycling of those highly nutrient dense medicinal seeds was incredibly helpful to me. And with hormonal balance, I'm now working with perimenopause and finding that the seed cycling is now extending my cycle. After my second baby, suddenly, my cycle was 23 days, 24 days. And I'm thinking, oh no, this is not good. This is not good. I'm 40 years old. This is not good. And truly, after 2 months of going back into the seed cycling, suddenly my cycle was back to 28, 29 days. So really powerful, I think. And of course, herbs, I think, truly come into play with hormones, and that's more of a complicated conversation. So many herbs that can be supportive. But ultimately, whole foods, seeds and grains as well, do help to kind of flush hormones, right? Other foods that contain sulforaphane, for example, the brassica family, like broccoli, kale, collards, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, all really good for reproductive hormone balance as well. And of course, incredibly, Ayurveda has known for centuries that our whole endocrine system, our whole glandular system, it's the chakras, right? And that Sanskrit word means wheel. So if one of the wheels of our endocrine system is not turning properly, it affects everything downstream or upstream. And that's why we have all of these different axes that we talk about in the health field, right? Like how the hypothalamus and the pituitary affect the adrenal glands or affect the ovaries. And it's really important to think about making sure that all of those glands are nourished. And I think that's where good quality protein comes in and where microminerals come in, right? One of the big healers for me with my thyroid was medicinal mushrooms, cordyceps in particular, and different seaweeds, right? So getting different kinds of microminerals from those foods really helped me heal my thyroid. So there's always an opportunity within food as medicine for hormonal healing and balance. And in terms of mood, yes, hormones are so much at play with how I'm showing up in the world and how I'm feeling. And the important thing to remember is that the gut bacteria in our large intestine primarily is secreting through neurotransmitters that it produces the majority of the hormones that control our mood, that control both, how we feel in terms of feeling good or how we feel in terms of feeling stressed. Like you were mentioning dopamine, right? That's secreted in the gut, as is serotonin, another feel-good hormone. Epinephrine and norepinephrine are kind of activated stress hormones. Those are secreted in the gut. So ultimately, feeding our gut bacteria good insoluble fiber from beans, whole grains, veggies, so that it can continue to flourish and produce the neurotransmitters that secrete the feel-good hormones that have a long-lasting impact, as opposed to just that momentary impact of sugar. That's really the way to help mood remain balanced.
Absolutely. And I think it can be really easy to forget that anything we ingest, so any food that we're ingesting and our body is breaking it down and it's extracting the nutrients from that food, goes on to help create healthy tissues in our body. We use the Sanskrit word dhatus in Ayurveda, so healthy dhatus, to healthy tissues. And it's true for our hormones. As you were mentioning your thyroid, like your thyroid needs iodine and selenium from foods to actually synthesize the hormones. So when you said you were eating seaweed, I was like, well, it's no surprise because it's really high in iodine. So that's really supportive of someone who might have an iodine deficiency that's affecting their thyroid. So food truly is medicine. And you mentioned herbs, and herbal medicine is so powerful. And even our pharmaceuticals, a lot of them are derived from plants and then have been scientifically modified to mimic the plants. So the wisdom actually comes from plants, from food, and from herbs. And I think it's really important to understand how potent it is in our overall health. As you mentioned, you did a beautiful job of explaining how our food affects our hormones, our gut health, and our mood. And I feel that if people really, really took that on board and really understand that, they would make a lot more effort, or their nutrition requirements would be a priority in their life. And so they would work out ways to eat really wholesome most of the time. Yeah, sometimes, we have fun, we enjoy some of those simple guilty pleasures of life, and that's okay. But the majority of the time, the reason we're eating is to fuel the body for health and longevity, not just for the pleasure and the taste. It's really about our health.
Absolutely. And I think, my Chinese medicine teacher was always very clear to say we eat the way that we do the majority of the time, so that when we go out to eat or have a celebration or eat those foods that are more rich or high intensity, the system is so strong that it can tolerate that and say, that was fine, I'm bouncing right back, right? Whereas when those foods are coming through all the time that are rich or processed, the body kind of reaches these different levels of overwhelm and oversaturation. And it just makes it harder to function in the world. Ultimately, I don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, totally. Now, you have a book coming out this December, which is super exciting, called The Culinary Pharmacy. Could you tell us a little bit more about this book?
Absolutely. So it's truly a compilation of all of these pieces that we've been talking about, right? Understanding ourselves, understanding how to cultivate true wellness. It is as complex and as changing of a process as our bodies going through everything that they do every day to keep us alive and keep us healthy. And I've tried to include, through the framework of my own story, what it was like for me growing up, emigrating to the States, going through all these different health challenges. Within that framework, I've tried to include, kind of how Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, the Mediterranean way of eating relate to each other. I've tried to include seasonal menu plans and recipes, information about food sovereignty and taking control of our food, as well as that notion of intuitive eating that comes from that sattvic balanced place that we were talking about, and some tools to start to kind of create your own personal nutrition plan, and then to amend that plan as you change and as life keeps happening, right? So my sincere hope is that it's something that helps people, right? To, again, clear out some of the noise, the information, the overwhelm of choices, so that they can feel that sense of harmony and balance in themselves. And ultimately, my goal is to make myself obsolete. I believe that we all have this knowledge of wellness and balance as our birthright, and it's been forgotten, which is understandable, and we need to be able to reclaim it. And so that's my hope, that what I know can be in the hands of everybody, because it's what we need to evolve as a species.
Amazing. It sounds so good. I can't wait to read it. Do you have any final words that you would like to share with us that we haven't covered so far?
We've talked about so much, and I think I just keep going back to what you were saying about keeping it simple, right? And yes, there's an intricacy and a complexity to these traditional modalities of healing. And try as best you can to, fill up your jars with food and buy as many fruits and vegetables as you can. Really start there. Go to a cooking class, have a dinner, gathering where you cook with another person or another family. Start to get inspired in that way and see where it leads you. Because that's ultimately how we all begin and how we all reconnect to ourselves and to our environment, to nature.
And I think for those who are struggling with really busy lives, and feel the pressure that doing this 7 days a week is overwhelming, so they just don't do it at all, just start at least with 2 days. Try 2 days of a week where you are like, they're your wholesome days, where you are just going to cook beautiful, wholesome, fresh foods and know that every bite you eat is just really, truly nourishing the body. Just start there. Just start somewhere. So don't have to, listen to this and go, oh my God, like I'm so awful. I'm eating so terribly, every day. Like, how can I change this? Like, just start with a day or 2 days of the week and just start from there, because, nothing changes if nothing changes.
Absolutely. Yes. Find one recipe you love.
Yeah.
That feels
Yeah.
really rich and beautiful and nourishing, and
Mm-hmm.
make that once a week.
Yeah. Yeah. So nothing changes if nothing changes, but change is also inevitable. So if you keep the same, you'll get the same problems and it'll create more and more. So we can change our whole body composition, our mind, our health, our longevity, the quality of life through our nutrition. So thank you so much. Where can our listeners find you and pre-order the book when that is ready for pre-order?
So my website is harmonized-living.com. And I love that your name is Harmony, and I feel like that connects us. So harmonizedliving.com, you can learn more about my work and connect. Sign up for my newsletter if you like, and the book will be available for pre-order in June, and you can get that information through my website as well. And I'm really excited to stay connected and hear from anybody who wants to reach out.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time and all of your wisdom that you have shared with us today. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.